This is a reading from the novel Embers of Liberty, which is available on Amazon as well as at the links below at the eBay store. You can get signed copies directly from me, or you can find me at shows, local shows that you can find on my website, where you can meet me in person and get a signed copy of the book. So I'm going to read from chapter 14 and probably 15 as sort of a preview. This book is about a family and their friends who are trying to escape central Illinois in an America that is torn apart by civil war, and part of the country, or most of the country, is ruled by a tyrannical government. And John and his family and friends are trying to escape that to give their kids a better life. So when we join them in chapter 14, they are about to cross from Illinois into Missouri via the bridge at Quincy, Illinois. So here we go. We're going to start chapter 14. John was feeling a little jumpy after their close call, but kept alert as he and Benny crossed the bridge. They moved as fast as they dared, knowing more than ever that time was against them. The longer they stayed on the bridge and near the city, the more danger they were in. The two men could see the outline of a guardhouse ahead in the darkness. It was a small wooden building that straddled the concrete median and hadn't been visible until the two were further up the incline. A lowered wooden arm blocked each side, and dim spotlights lit each wooden barrier. They could barely make out the silhouette of a man sitting in the building. With a signal from Benny, they both crouched down and approached the shack silently. Soon the two were close enough to see that the man was facing away from them, and by his posture he appeared to be sleeping. As they approached, a loud snore confirmed their suspicions. The two men stopped for a moment. "We will have to take him out silently," Benny whispered, making a motion with his rifle as if bashing something with the butt end. "No," John said. "As long as he stays asleep, he's no danger. I don't want to start hurting people unless we have no other choice." Benny studied John for a moment, but finally nodded. "What do you propose, then?" "You stay here and watch him. Make sure the groups that pass are as quiet as they can be. I'll continue on to make sure the rest of the way is safe," John said. "If the guard wakes up before we all cross?" Benny asked grimly. John sighed, looking at the guard and then back at Benny. "If he wakes, do what you have to do to ensure our safety." "Fine." They both walked softly toward the guard station. The guard was asleep in his chair, a copy of the national news in his lap. Benny posted himself close to the building so he could keep an eye on the guard and watch for their people. John patted him on the shoulder before continuing across the bridge. John crossed the bridge without further incident and found the other side to be dark and deserted. There was an old building, probably a warehouse, north of the road, and a stand of trees to the south across a field. He waited anxiously for the first group, straining to see anyone moving on the bridge. Alone in the dark, it was peaceful. John could almost imagine that he was in a different place, just living instead of running to live. To John, it felt like an eternity, but it wasn't long before the first group could be seen moving toward him. When they reached the end of the bridge, he directed them to the trees south of the highway. Everyone was nervous, but seemed to relax when he greeted them at the west end of the bridge. John was trying to keep track of how many had crossed, but he was tired and lost count after a while. When he guessed they were coming to the last of the refugees, he stopped one of the groups. "How many more behind you?" John asked. "I think just two more," a man named Jeremy replied. "The Smiths and their group, and Amanda and hers. Oh, that's all that's left." John nodded and waved them onto the trees. He didn't like how long it was taking. A small part of him was regretting putting Amanda in the back of the line. He pushed those feelings down, though. He had to think of everyone, and as far as he was concerned, Amanda was the best choice to make sure each group left the park on time, and those remaining stayed undetected. He kept telling himself that everything would be fine, and he shouldn't worry. Two sounds shattered the calm night and nearly stopped John's heart. First, an alarm went off, punctuated by a bright, pulsating red light at the middle of the bridge. The alarm was followed immediately by a loud crack that echoed through the night. John only knew it was a gunshot because of the practice Benny had put them all through, but the sound seemed somehow louder and more sinister hearing it then. He could feel his whole world turning upside down as he raced for the bridge. John was met halfway to the guard station by the Smiths group. Mrs. Smith had a guilty look on her face as she tried to calm her fussy baby. "Sorry, John," Mr. Smith said. "Don't worry about it. Just get to the trees south of the road," John said, waving them on. He grabbed Carl, who had been part of the group. "What happened?" John asked when the rest were out of earshot. He already had a pretty good idea, but he needed to hear it from someone else. The baby started crying, Carl said. I guess the guard woke up and pushed the alarm when Benny was trying to help them. Benny didn't hesitate when the Fed reached for his gun. Carl looked a little sick as he said it. He shot the guard once, then yelled at us to run. John squeezed Carl's shoulder and told him to get to the trees with his wife and the rest. He ran the rest of the way to the middle of the bridge. Benny was crouched near the guard shack looking toward the city. Do you see them? John asked. He was straining to see the rest of the refugees that should be coming up the bridge. Benny looked at him as if expecting questions, but John didn't ask. They could hear police sirens cutting through the cool night air and knew this was no time for second-guessing. No, they should be near the ramp, but with the sirens I doubt any of them would want to try and cross, Benny replied. The refugees had been on the road a couple of days, but that moment made it all much more real for him. John wasn't sure if he had been naive or just too optimistic, but he never actually believed they might have to hurt someone. He'd been through all the practice like everyone else, but to him it had just been in case they ran into trouble. He stood up and held out the rifle for Benny to take. It will be easier without this, John said. What are you doing? Benny asked. Don't wait for us. Everyone's in the trees south of the highway across an old field. Get to them and keep going. We'll catch up if we can, John said. John, those people back there need you, Benny said. We don't have time for this, Benny. The sirens were getting closer. I know I'm breaking my own rules, but it's my wife and kids. We'll catch up to you. Benny nodded and held out his hand. John shook it firmly, and the bearded man took his rifle. He gave Benny a confident smile before he started running back toward the city and his family. John forced himself to look into the guard shack as he passed. For him to ignore it or act as if it hadn't happened felt wrong. The man inside was slumped against the wall of the shack and had slid to the floor. John was no expert, but from the peaceful look of him, the shot had been clean and the guard had died instantly. John wondered if the man had a family. He knew they'd been taken care of, but he still felt guilty that their path had crossed his and circumstances had led to that fatal moment. He imagined soldiers felt the same way. Even when it's the enemy you're fighting, they are people, and it's still a life that ends. In that brief moment, that's how John resolved to deal with it. They were soldiers, and he hated that life was lost. He would carry the image of that guard and the guilt of his death forever. But he was in a war to save his family and their freedom. So that's chapter 14 of Embers of Liberty. Again, this is available on Amazon.com. You can just search my name, or you can search Embers of Liberty. It should come up. You can also find a link to get signed copies directly from me in the video description below under books and mugs. There are two versions of this book, a paperback and a collector's edition hardback. The hardback actually includes author notes from me. I went through and did some extra edits and added some notes, and I added an exclusive short story at the end of the collector's edition, which leads into the next novel. So check those out if you're interested. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And I will see you guys all again soon. Much love. Bye.